They ignored me at his wedding, they ignored me again at his funeral. I sat in the back row of St. Matthew's Cathedral, wearing the same black dress I'd worn to every important event in Thomas's life for the past 37 years. The same dress I'd worn when they wouldn't let me sit in the family section at his wedding to Victoria. The same dress I'd worn to his father's funeral when they'd seated me behind the business associates. The same dress that had become my uniform for being present but unwelcome, acknowledged but never accepted. The cathedral was packed with 500 people who'd known Thomas Ashford as a successful businessman, a devoted husband, a pillar of the community. They spoke in hushed tones about his charitable work, his business acumen, his tragic death at 62 from a sudden heart attack. They dabbed their eyes with expensive tissues and wore their grief like designer accessories. None of them mentioned the woman who'd raised him. "Dearly beloved Father Morrison," began, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "We gather today to celebrate the life of Thomas James Ashford, beloved husband, father, and friend." Beloved son was notably absent from that list. I folded my hands in my lap and watched Victoria sob dramatically in the front row, surrounded by her children, Thomas's stepchildren, who'd inherited his name and his fortune, but had never once called him father. She wore widow's weeds that probably cost more than I made in 6 months. And her tears fell with the precision of someone who'd practiced grief in front of a mirror. Behind her sat Thomas's business partners, his golf buddies, his country club friends. The mayor was there, along with half the city council. The governor had sent a representative. Everyone who mattered in Thomas's carefully constructed world had come to pay their respects. Everyone except the woman who'd mattered first. I'd arrived early, hoping to sit closer to the front. But Victoria's assistant, a sharp-faced woman named Patricia, had intercepted me at the door. "Mrs. Chen," she'd said, her voice dripping with false sympathy, "how thoughtful of you to come. I'm afraid the family section is reserved, but we've saved you a lovely spot in the back." Mrs. Chen. After 37 years, they still couldn't bring themselves to acknowledge who I really was. The eulogy was delivered by Thomas's business partner, a man who'd known him for 15 years, and spoke about his humble beginnings and self-made success. He painted a picture of a man who'd pulled himself up by his bootstraps, who'd overcome adversity through sheer determination and natural talent. He made no mention of the woman who'd worked 3 jobs to pay for Thomas's private school tuition. No mention of the woman who'd saved every penny for his college fund while living in a studio apartment above a laundromat. No mention of the woman who'd sacrificed everything so that her son could have the opportunities she'd never had. I closed my eyes and remembered the real Thomas, not the polished businessman in the expensive suit, but the little boy who'd cried when other children made fun of his secondhand clothes. The teenager who'd been ashamed of his mother's accent, her job cleaning houses for wealthy families, her inability to fit into the world he was determined to join. The boy who'd changed his name from Chen to Ashford when he turned 18, erasing the last visible connection to the woman who'd given him everything. Thomas was a man who understood the value of hard work, the eulogist continued, who never forgot where he came from. I almost laughed. Thomas had spent the last 20 years of his life forgetting exactly where he came from. He'd invented a new history for himself, a story about growing up in a middle-class family, about parents who'd died tragically when he was young, about overcoming loss through determination and grit. It was a beautiful story. It was also completely false. The truth was that Thomas's father had abandoned us when Thomas was 3, leaving behind nothing but debt and broken promises. The truth was that I'd raised Thomas alone, working as a seamstress, a house cleaner, and a night shift factory worker to keep food on the table and a roof over our heads. The truth was that Thomas had been ashamed of that story, ashamed of me. From the moment he'd realized that other children had fathers and mothers who spoke perfect English and houses in nice neighborhoods. "Let us pray," Father Morrison said, and 500 heads bowed in unison. I didn't bow my head. Instead, I looked around the cathedral at all the people who'd known Thomas as an adult but had never known the child I'd raised. I wondered what they'd think if they knew the truth about his humble beginnings. I wondered if they'd still admire his self-made success, if they knew it had been built on the foundation of a mother's sacrifice and a son's shame. After the service, the crowd filed out slowly, forming small groups on the cathedral steps to share memories and make plans for the reception. I waited until most of them had left before making my way toward the exit, hoping to slip away unnoticed. "Excuse me," I turned to find a young woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. She was maybe 30, with dark hair pulled back in a simple bun and a black dress that looked like it had come from a department store rather than a designer boutique. "I'm Sarah," she said, extending her hand. "I worked with Thomas at the foundation." "Mrs. Chen," I replied automatically, though something in her expression made me add Thomas's mother. Sarah's eyes widened slightly. "His mother, but I thought, Victoria said his parents had died years ago." "Victoria says many things," I replied carefully. "I'm so sorry for your loss," Sarah said, and I could tell she meant it. He was a complicated man, but he did good work at the foundation. He helped a lot of people." "Did he?" "Oh yes. Especially with our scholarship program for underprivileged children. He was very passionate about making sure kids from difficult backgrounds had access to education." Sarah paused, studying my face. "He never talked about his family, but sometimes I got the sense that he understood what those kids were going through, like he'd been there himself." I felt something crack inside my chest, not quite grief, not quite pride, but something in between. He had been there. "Would you, double quotes, Sarah hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "Would you like to come to the reception? I know Victoria didn't invite you, but I think you have more right to be there than most of the people who were." I looked toward the limousines, waiting to carry the official mourners to the country club where Thomas had spent so many evenings. The place where I'd never been welcome even when he was alive. "Thank you," I said, "but I don't think that's where I belong." "Where do you belong?" Sarah asked gently. I considered the question. Where did the mother of a man who'd spent his adult life pretending she didn't exist belong? Where did a woman who'd been erased from her son's official history fit in his death? "I don't know," I admitted. "I've been trying to figure that out for 20 years. Sarah pulled a business card from her purse and pressed it into my hand. "The foundation is reading Thomas's will tomorrow at 10 a.m. I think you should be there." "Why?" "Because Thomas left very specific instructions about who should be present, and your name was at the top of the list." I stared at the card, my hands trembling slightly. "That's impossible. Thomas and we haven't spoken in 5 years. Haven't you?" Sarah smiled mysteriously. "Mrs. Chen, I think you might be surprised by what Thomas remembered and what he never forgot." She walked away, leaving me standing on the cathedral steps with a business card and 1,000 questions. Around me, the last of the mourners were departing, climbing into expensive cars and driving away to celebrate a life they'd never fully understood. But for the first time in 20 years, I had somewhere to go tomorrow. For the first time since Thomas had changed his name and rewritten his history, someone was expecting me to show up. I looked up at the cathedral spires, reaching toward the gray October sky, and wondered if my son had finally found a way to acknowledge the woman who'd made his success possible. Tomorrow, I would find out if being ignored had finally come to an end. I spent the night in the small apartment I'd called home for 15 years, surrounded by photographs that told the story Victoria's family would never acknowledge. Thomas at 5, gap-toothed and grinning in his school picture. Thomas at 10, serious and studious in his private school uniform. Thomas at 18, handsome and confident in his graduation cap and gown, already looking like someone who belonged in a different world than the one I'd given him. The photographs stopped there. After he'd changed his name to Ashford, after he'd created his new identity, there had been no more pictures for me to take. I made tea in the small kitchen where I'd taught Thomas to cook simple meals, where we'd done homework together at the scratched wooden table, where I'd counted and recounted the money that would pay for his education. Everything in this apartment was modest, practical, earned through years of careful saving and sacrifice. It was the opposite of the world Thomas had built for himself. At 9:30 the next morning, I stood outside the offices of Ashford Foundation, reading the brass nameplate that bore my son's chosen name. The building was sleek and modern, all glass and steel reaching toward the sky like a monument to success. I'd never been inside, though I'd walked past it countless times over the years. Wondering what Thomas did in those gleaming offices, wondering if he ever thought about the woman who'd made it all possible. Sarah met me in the lobby, her smile warm and genuine, in a way that reminded me why I'd trusted her yesterday. "Mrs. Chen, I'm so glad you came. The reading is in the conference room on the 20th floor." The elevator ride was silent, but I could feel Sarah watching me with curious eyes. When the doors opened, she led me down a hallway lined with photographs of the foundation's work, children receiving scholarships, families moving into new homes, communities celebrating new programs and opportunities. "Thomas built something good here," Sarah said quietly. "Whatever else happened in his life, he used his success to help people who needed it." The conference room was smaller than I'd expected, with a long table surrounded by perhaps a dozen chairs. Most were already occupied when we entered. Victoria sat at the head of the table, her eyes red-rimmed, but her makeup perfect. Her children flanked her, Michael and Jennifer, both in their 30s, both wearing expressions of barely concealed impatience. Thomas's business partners were there, along with several people I didn't recognize. At the far end of the table sat an elderly man in an expensive suit who could only be the lawyer. Every head turned when I entered, and the silence that followed was deafening. "What is she doing here?" Victoria's voice cut through the quiet like a blade. "Mrs. Chen was specifically requested by Thomas to attend this reading," the lawyer said calmly. "Her presence is required by the terms of the will." "That's impossible," Michael said, his voice carrying the same dismissive tone Thomas had perfected in his 20s. "My stepfather didn't have any family. His parents died when he was young." I took the empty chair Sarah indicated, directly across from Victoria. For the first time in 20 years, I was sitting at the same table as my son's family, acknowledged as someone who belonged there. "Shall we begin?" the lawyer asked. He was a distinguished man with silver hair and kind eyes. The sort of person who'd spent decades helping wealthy families navigate the complexities of inheritance and legacy. "I am Jonathan Hartwell," he continued, "and I've been Thomas Ashford's attorney for the past 15 years. Before we read the will, Thomas left specific instructions that I share some background information with all of you." He opened a thick folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper. "Thomas came to me 5 years ago with an unusual request. He wanted to rewrite his will completely, but he also wanted to leave behind a full accounting of his life, the real story, not the version he'd been telling for 20 years. Victoria shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "What do you mean? The real story?" "I mean the truth about where Thomas came from, how he built his fortune, and who made his success possible." Hartwell looked directly at me. "Mrs. Chen, Thomas asked me to begin by reading a letter he wrote specifically for this moment." He pulled out an envelope marked with my name in Thomas's careful handwriting. My hands shook as I accepted it, aware that everyone in the room was watching me. "Thomas wanted you to read this aloud," Hartwell said gently. He said it was time for everyone to hear the truth. I opened the envelope with trembling fingers and unfolded the letter inside. Thomas's voice seemed to echo in my mind as I read his words silently first, then aloud to the room. "To my mother, Li Wei Chen, who gave me everything and asked for nothing in return. I know I have no right to call you that after 20 years of pretending you don't exist. I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness after the way I've treated you, the way I've denied you, the way I've let others believe you were dead. But you are my mother. You raised me alone after my father abandoned us. You worked 3 jobs to pay for my education. You sacrificed your own dreams so that I could have opportunities you never had. You loved me unconditionally, even when I was too ashamed and too proud to love you back. I changed my name because I was a coward. I created a false history because I was embarrassed by the truth. I let people believe my parents were dead because it was easier than explaining that my mother was a Chinese immigrant who cleaned houses for a living. I have spent 20 years trying to become someone worthy of the life you gave me, and I have failed. Not because I didn't achieve success, but because I achieved it by denying the woman who made it possible. If you are reading this, it means I am dead, and it means I finally found the courage to tell the truth. I hope it's not too late. The room was silent except for the sound of my own voice reading my son's words. When I finished, I looked up to find Victoria staring at me with an expression I couldn't read. "You're Thomas's mother," she said quietly. "His real mother, yes, but he told me. He said his parents died in a car accident when he was 19. He told everyone that story." I replied, "It was easier than the truth." Michael leaned forward, his face flushed with anger. "So everything he told us about his background was a lie." "Not everything," I said carefully. "He did grow up poor. He did work hard to get where he was. He just ... edited out the parts he was ashamed of. Including you," Jennifer said, and there was something like sympathy in her voice. "Including me." Hartwell cleared his throat. "There's more. Thomas left detailed instructions about how his estates should be distributed and his reasoning for each bequest. But first, he wanted everyone to understand the full scope of what Mrs. Chen sacrificed for his success." He pulled out another document, a financial statement that made Victoria gasp when she saw the numbers. Over the course of Thomas's childhood and education, Mrs. Chen spent approximately $340,000 on his schooling, tutoring, college tuition, and living expenses. This represented her entire life savings, plus money borrowed against her future earnings. $340,000, Victoria's voice was barely a whisper. Thomas calculated the amount carefully, including interest and inflation adjustments. He said it represented every penny his mother had ever earned. And more besides. I stared at the document, seeing my life's work reduced to numbers on a page. Every double shift at the factory, every house I'd cleaned, every meal I'd skipped to save money, all of it quantified and calculated with the precision Thomas had brought to his business dealings. "He kept track," I whispered. "He kept track of everything," Hartwell confirmed. "Every sacrifice, every missed opportunity, every time you put his needs before your own. Thomas said he owed you not just money, but acknowledgement, recognition, the respect he should have given you 20 years ago." Sarah, who had been silent throughout the reading, spoke up from her corner of the room. "Mrs. Chen, Thomas, talked about you at the foundation. Not by name, but he used to say that everything good he'd ever accomplished was built on his mother's strength. He said she was the bravest person he'd ever known. He said that all the time. Especially when we were working with families like yours was. Single mothers trying to give their children better lives. He understood their struggles in a way that always surprised me." Victoria was crying now, quiet tears that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than grief. "I never knew," she said. "In 15 years of marriage, he never told me any of this. He was ashamed," I said simply. "Not of me, I think, but of himself, of what he'd become." Hartwell opened the will itself, a thick document bound in leather. "Shall we continue with the reading?" I nodded, though my heart was racing. Whatever Thomas had decided about his estate, whatever acknowledgement or rejection awaited me, at least the truth was finally being told. At least, after 20 years of being invisible, I was finally being seen. Hartwell adjusted his glasses and opened Thomas's will to the first page. The document was thick, bound in leather, and marked with dozens of colored tabs that suggested a complexity far beyond a simple distribution of assets. "The last will and testament of Thomas James Ashford," he began. "Also known as Thomas Chen, born Li Tianming Chen." Victoria's head snapped up. "Also known as, what does that mean?" "It means," Hartwell said carefully, "that 5 years ago, Thomas legally reclaimed his birth name alongside his chosen name. He never told anyone, but he wanted his original identity to be part of his official record." I felt something shift inside my chest, not quite forgiveness, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. My son had spent his final years trying to bridge the gap between who he'd been and who he'd become. Thomas divided his estate into several categories. Hartwell continued: personal bequests, charitable donations, business assets, and what he called debts of honor. Mrs. Chen, your inheritance falls into that final category. Inheritance, I whispered. Thomas left me something. He left you everything that mattered most to him, Hartwell said. But before we get to the specifics, he wanted me to read his explanation for each bequest. He turned to a section marked with a red tab. To my wife Victoria, who gave me 15 years of companionship and social acceptance, I leave the house on Beacon Hill, the vacation home in Martha's Vineyard, and $2 million in liquid assets. Victoria, you married a successful man and helped him maintain his position in society. You deserve to continue living the life we built together. Victoria nodded, though she looked confused rather than relieved. That's generous. But what about the business, the foundation? We'll get to that, Hartwell said. To my stepchildren, Michael and Jennifer, who accepted me as part of their family, despite having no obligation to do so, I leave $500,000 each, along with my gratitude for treating me with respect, even when I hadn't earned it. Michael and Jennifer exchanged glances. The amounts were substantial, but far less than they'd probably expected from a man worth over $50 million. To my business partners, Hartwell continued, I leave the option to purchase my shares in Ashford Industries at fair market value, with payment terms extending over 5 years. You helped me build something profitable, and you deserve the chance to continue that work without interference from my estate. Thomas's business partner, a man named Davidson, leaned forward. What if we can't afford the purchase price? Then the shares will be sold to the highest bidder, and you'll receive your percentage as minority partners. Hartwell replied. Thomas was confident you'd find a way to make it work. He turned to another section, this one marked with a blue tab. To the Ashford Foundation, I leave $10 million in endowment funds, along with specific instructions for expanding our scholarship programs for children from single-parent households. Sarah smiled through her tears. He was always passionate about those scholarships. Now we come to the largest bequest, Hartwell said, turning to a section marked with a gold tab. To my mother, Li Wei Chen, who gave me life twice, once when she bore me, and again when she sacrificed everything to give me opportunities she never had. My hands gripped the edge of the table as Hartwell continued reading. I leave to my mother the sum of $35 million, representing the principal value of my estate after other bequests. But more than that, I leave her ownership of the Ashford Foundation with full authority to direct its mission and programs as she sees fit. The room erupted. Victoria gasped. Michael and Jennifer stared at me with expressions of shock and something that might have been resentment. Davidson was calculating numbers on his phone, probably trying to figure out what this meant for the business valuation. $35 million. Victoria's voice was barely audible. Plus control of the foundation, Hartwell confirmed. Thomas was very specific about his reasoning. He calculated that if Mrs. Chen had invested the $340,000 she spent on his education in a conservative portfolio 30 years ago, it would be worth approximately $35 million today. He considered this inheritance to be a return on her investment with interest. I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. The numbers were incomprehensible, but the gesture behind them was clear. Thomas had spent his final years trying to repay a debt he'd never acknowledged while he was alive. There's more, Hartwell said gently. Thomas left a personal letter for Mrs. Chen to be read privately, but he also left instructions for a public statement to be read at this meeting. He pulled out another document, this one handwritten rather than typed. Thomas wrote, I have spent 20 years building a reputation as a self-made man, but that reputation was built on a lie. I was not self-made, I was mother-made. Every success I achieved, every opportunity I seized, every dollar I earned was possible only because Li Wei Chen sacrificed her own dreams to make mine possible. Hartwell paused, looking around the room at faces that reflected varying degrees of shock, confusion, and calculation. I changed my name because I was ashamed of being poor, of being different, of having a mother who spoke with an accent and worked with her hands. I created a false history because I thought the truth would hold me back. But the truth is that my mother's strength, her determination, her unconditional love, these were the foundation of everything good I ever accomplished. Victoria was crying openly now. He never told me any of this. In 15 years, he never mentioned his mother was alive. I know this inheritance will seem excessive to some people, Hartwell continued reading. $35 million is more money than most people see in a lifetime. But it represents only a fraction of what my mother gave me. She gave me her youth, her health, her dreams, her entire future. She gave me everything she had and everything she could have been. No amount of money can repay that debt, but this is my attempt to acknowledge it. I found my voice finally, though it came out as barely a whisper. He kept track of everything. Everything, Hartwell confirmed. Thomas documented every sacrifice you made, every opportunity you gave up, every way your life became smaller so his could become larger. He said it took him 20 years to understand the true cost of his success. Sarah leaned forward from her corner of the room. Mrs. Chen, there's something else you should know. For the past 5 years, Thomas has been quietly funding a scholarship program specifically for children of single immigrant mothers. He never put his name on it, but he personally reviewed every application. He was looking for kids who reminded him of himself. How many scholarships? I asked. 237 so far. Full tuition, room and board, plus mentoring and support services. Thomas said he was trying to give other children what you gave him. Michael spoke up for the first time since the reading began. So our stepfather was secretly funding scholarships while lying to us about his background. He was trying to make amends, Sarah said firmly, in the only way he knew how. But why the secrecy? Jennifer asked. Why not just tell us the truth? Why not acknowledge his mother publicly? Hartwell consulted his notes. Thomas addressed that question in his letter to Mrs. Chen. He said he was afraid that acknowledging the truth would diminish his credibility in business, that people would see him differently if they knew he'd lied about his background. So he chose his reputation over his mother, Victoria said quietly. For 20 years, yes. But in the end, he chose his mother over everything else. I looked around the table at these people who'd known Thomas as an adult, who'd shared his life and his success without ever knowing the woman who'd made it possible. They were struggling to reconcile the man they'd known with the story they were hearing, trying to understand how someone could live such a fundamental lie for so long. Mrs. Chen Hartwell said, Thomas left specific instructions about the foundation. He wanted you to know that you have complete authority to change its mission, its programs, its entire focus if you choose. He said it was time for his mother's values to guide the work, not his. What were his values? I asked. Ambition, success, recognition, building something that would last. And what are yours? I thought about the question, about the life I'd lived and the choices I'd made. Helping people who need help. Making sure children have opportunities. Taking care of family. Sarah smiled. Those sound like better values for a foundation. Victoria stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. I need some air. This is a lot to process. She walked to the window that overlooked the city, her reflection ghost-like in the glass. 15 years, she said without turning around. 15 years of marriage, and I never knew the most important thing about him. He was protecting himself, I said, and maybe protecting you too, from having to choose between loving him and being ashamed of where he came from. But that choice should have been mine to make. Yes, I agreed. It should have been. Hartwell closed the will and gathered his papers. Mrs. Chen, there are many details to work out. Tax implications, transfer procedures, foundation governance, but the core bequests are clear and legally binding. Thomas spent 5 years making sure everything was properly documented and legally sound. I stared at my hands, trying to process what had just happened. In the space of an hour, I'd gone from being an invisible woman ignored at her son's funeral to being one of the wealthiest people in the city. But more than that, I'd finally been acknowledged, finally been seen, finally been given the recognition I'd never asked for but had always deserved. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now," Hartwell said, "you decide what to do with the gift your son finally found the courage to give you." 3 days after the will reading, I sat in Thomas's office at the foundation, surrounded by the life he'd built without me. The walls were lined with awards and photographs, Thomas shaking hands with politicians, cutting ribbons at charity events, accepting recognition for his philanthropic work. In all of them, he looked successful, confident, completely at home in the world of wealth and influence. But now I knew the truth behind those photographs. Every smile had been carefully constructed, every handshake a performance, every award a monument to a lie he'd been telling for 20 years. Sarah knocked on the door, carrying a stack of files and wearing the patient expression of someone who'd been trying to help a confused new boss understand her inheritance. "The board meeting is in an hour," she said, settling into the chair across from the desk. "Are you ready?" "I don't think anyone could be ready for this," I replied, gesturing at the financial reports spread across Thomas's desk. The foundation controlled assets worth over $40 million, funded scholarships for hundreds of students, and employed 37 people. In 3 days, I'd gone from cleaning other people's houses to being responsible for other people's futures. "The board members are curious about you," Sarah said carefully. "Most of them have never heard of Li Wei-Chen. They're wondering what your vision is for the foundation's future." I looked out the window at the city, where I'd spent 37 years being invisible, where I'd raised a son who'd grown up to be ashamed of me, where I'd worked jobs that paid just enough to survive while dreaming of something better for the next generation. "Sarah, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "When Thomas talked about his mother, the one he said was dead, what did he say about her?" Sarah was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "He said she was the strongest person he'd ever known, that she'd sacrificed everything for her child's future, that she'd worked multiple jobs and never complained, never asked for anything in return. He said that many times, especially when we were interviewing scholarship applicants, he'd read their essays about their mother's struggles and he'd get this look on his face, like he was remembering something painful but important. He was remembering me. He was remembering you," Sarah agreed. "But he was also remembering his shame about denying you. I think that's why he was so passionate about helping other families. He was trying to honor you without having to acknowledge you." There was another knock on the door. Victoria entered, looking uncertain and out of place in the foundation's modest offices. She'd traded her designer clothes for a simple black suit, and her usual perfect makeup was absent. "I hope I'm not interrupting," she said. "Not at all," I replied, though I was surprised to see her. We hadn't spoken since the will reading, and I'd assumed she was angry about the inheritance distribution. Victoria sat down, her hands folded in her lap like a schoolgirl. "I wanted to apologize. For the funeral, for the way you were treated, for 20 years of not knowing you existed. You didn't know because Thomas didn't tell you, but I should have asked more questions. I should have wondered why a man who claimed to be an orphan never talked about his childhood, never showed me baby pictures, never mentioned a single memory from before he was 20. Sarah excused herself quietly, leaving Victoria and me alone in Thomas's office. "I've been thinking about our marriage," Victoria continued. 15 years of thinking I knew my husband, and it turns out I knew nothing about the most important part of his life. I keep wondering what else he lied about, what other secrets he was keeping. "He loved you," I said, though I wasn't sure why I felt compelled to defend the son who'd spent 20 years denying my existence. Did he? Or did he love the idea of me? The social status I brought him, the way I helped him fit into the world he wanted to belong to. It was a fair question, and one I couldn't answer. I'd watched Thomas's wedding from the back of the church, seen him smile as he promised to love and honor a woman who represented everything he thought he wanted. But I'd also seen the way he looked at Victoria, with gratitude rather than passion, with appreciation rather than devotion. "Victoria, why are you here?" She was quiet for a long moment, staring at the photographs on Thomas's wall. "Because I want to understand. I want to know who my husband really was, and I think you're the only person who can tell me." "What do you want to know?" "Everything. What he was like as a child. What he dreamed about, what he was afraid of, what made him think he had to choose between loving his mother and being successful." I leaned back in Thomas's chair, thinking about the little boy who'd been so determined to fit in, so desperate to belong somewhere other than the small apartment where we'd lived. "Thomas was brilliant," I said finally. "Even as a child, he could see patterns other people missed, solve problems other kids couldn't understand. But he was also sensitive. He felt everything deeply: embarrassment, shame, the weight of being different. Different how? Poor, foreign, fatherless. He was the only Asian kid in his private school, the only one whose mother packed his lunch in recycled containers instead of buying him cafeteria food. He came home crying so many times because other children made fun of his name, his clothes, the way I spoke English." Victoria's eyes filled with tears. "So he decided to become someone else. He decided to become someone who would never be laughed at again. Someone who would never have to explain why his mother worked 3 jobs, or why his father wasn't in the picture, or why his last name sounded foreign, but that meant abandoning you. That meant protecting himself." I understood, even when it hurt. Victoria stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city where Thomas had built his new identity. "I keep thinking about all the times he could have told me the truth. All the opportunities he had to say, 'Actually, my mother is alive, and she's the reason I'm successful.' Why didn't he? Because he was afraid you'd see him differently, that you'd realize he wasn't the self-made man you'd married. But I would have admired him more, not less. What he accomplished, starting from where he started, that's incredible. You say that now. But would you have said it 20 years ago? Would you have married a man whose mother cleaned houses for a living?" Victoria was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was small and honest. "I don't know. I'd like to think I would have, but I don't know." Thomas didn't know either. So he chose certainty over risk. He chose the lie that guaranteed acceptance over the truth that might have led to rejection. And now he's dead. And I'll never get the chance to prove him wrong. I joined Victoria at the window, looking out at the city where my son had spent 20 years hiding from his past. "Victoria, can I ask you something?" "Of course. What are you going to do now, with the inheritance, with your life?" "I honestly don't know. The house feels empty without Thomas, but it also feels like a museum dedicated to someone I never really knew. The money is more than I need, but it comes with the knowledge that my entire marriage was built on a lie." "Not a lie," I said gently, "an incomplete truth. Thomas loved you, Victoria. Maybe not the way you deserved to be loved, but he loved you as much as he was capable of loving anyone while he was carrying so much shame." Victoria turned to look at me, her eyes searching my face. "How can you be so generous? How can you defend him after what he did to you? Because he was my son. Because I spent 37 years loving him unconditionally, and that doesn't stop just because he made mistakes. Because I understand why he was afraid. But you must be angry." I was angry. For years, I was furious. But anger is exhausting, Victoria, and now that he's gone, what's the point? He can't apologize. He can't make amends. All I can do is decide what to do with the gift he finally found the courage to give me. Victoria nodded slowly. The foundation. $35 million and the chance to help other families avoid the choices Thomas thought he had to make. What do you mean? I thought about the scholarship applications Sarah had shown me, stories of children who were brilliant and ambitious, but ashamed of their backgrounds, kids who were already learning to hide parts of themselves to fit in. I mean, making sure that children don't have to choose between honoring their families and achieving their dreams. Making sure that success doesn't require abandoning the people who made it possible. Victoria smiled for the first time since I'd known her. That sounds like something Thomas would have wanted. I think so too. There was a soft knock on the door. Sarah peeked in, her expression apologetic. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but the board meeting is starting." "Mrs. Chen, they're ready for you." I looked at Victoria, then at Sarah, then at the photographs of Thomas that lined the walls. In a few minutes, I would walk into a room full of wealthy, influential people and tell them how I planned to use my son's money to honor the mother he'd spent 20 years denying. "Victoria," I said, "would you like to come to the board meeting? I think it's time for Thomas's family to meet his mother officially." Victoria's smile widened. "I'd be honored." Together, we walked toward the conference room where 12 board members waited to meet the woman who'd inherited control of Thomas Ashford's legacy. For the first time in 20 years, I wasn't walking into a room alone. For the first time since Thomas's wedding, his family was acknowledging that I belonged there. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was a beginning. 6 months later, I stood in the same cathedral where Thomas's funeral had been held. But this time, I wasn't sitting in the back row. This time, I was at the podium, looking out at an audience of scholarship recipients, their families, and the people who'd helped make their dreams possible. The first annual Li Wei Chen Scholarship Ceremony was nothing like the formal charity galas Thomas had favored. Instead of expensive gowns and champagne, we had folding chairs and homemade cookies. Instead of wealthy donors writing checks to feel good about themselves, we had working parents who'd sacrificed everything to give their children opportunities. 5 years ago, I began, my voice carrying clearly through the cathedral. My son Thomas established a scholarship program for children from single-parent households. He never put his name on it, never took public credit for it. Because he was trying to honor a debt he thought he could never repay. In the front row, Victoria sat with Sarah and the foundation's board members. She'd become an unexpected ally in the months since Thomas's death, helping me navigate the social and financial complexities of running a major foundation. More than that, she'd become something I'd never expected, a friend. Thomas grew up believing he had to choose between honoring his family and achieving success, I continued. He thought that acknowledging his background would limit his opportunities. So he created a new identity and spent 20 years pretending his mother was dead. A murmur ran through the audience. Most of these families knew about shame, about the pressure to hide parts of themselves to fit in, about the impossible choice between authenticity and acceptance. But success built on shame is not really success at all. It's just an expensive way to hide from yourself. I looked out at the 50 scholarship recipients sitting with their families. Brilliant. Ambitious young people who were just beginning to understand their own potential. Some were first-generation immigrants, like Thomas had been. Others were children of single mothers, kids who'd grown up in poverty, teenagers who'd learned to be ashamed of their circumstances. These scholarships are not charity, I said firmly. They are investments. Investments in young people who understand the value of education because they've seen what happens when you don't have it. Investments in students who will never take their opportunities for granted because they know how hard their families worked to provide them. In the third row, I spotted Maria Santos, whose mother cleaned offices at night to pay for her daughter's college applications. Next to her sat David Kim, whose father drove a taxi 16 hours a day to support his son's dream of becoming a doctor. Behind them, dozens of other families who'd made sacrifices I recognized, who'd given up their own dreams to make their children's dreams possible. But more than that, I continued, these scholarships come with a promise that you will never have to choose between honoring your family and achieving your goals. A promise that success means bringing your whole self to everything you do, not hiding the parts of yourself that make you different. I paused, thinking about Thomas and the choice he'd made. The 20 years he'd spent living as someone else. My son spent his adult life trying to become worthy of the sacrifices I made for him. But he was already worthy. He was worthy the day he was born, worthy when he struggled in school, worthy when he was ashamed of our small apartment and my accented English please. He didn't need to earn my love or prove he deserved my sacrifice. He just needed to accept it. Victoria was crying now, quiet tears that she didn't try to hide. Beside her, Sarah was taking notes for the foundation's newsletter, documenting this moment when Thomas's legacy was finally being told truthfully. So to the students receiving scholarships today, I want you to remember something. You are not here because you've proven you deserve help. You are here because you are worthy of help, period. Your worth is not contingent on your success. Your value is not determined by how well you hide your struggles or how seamlessly you fit into spaces that weren't designed for people like you. I looked directly at Maria Santos, whose scholarship essay had described the shame she felt when classmates saw her mother cleaning their school at night. Maria, your mother's work is not something to be ashamed of. It's something to be proud of. She's building your future with her own hands. And that's the most beautiful kind of love there is. I turned to David Kim, whose father had worked double shifts to pay for his son's SAT prep courses. David, your father's sacrifice doesn't make you indebted to him. It makes you loved by him. The difference matters. One by one, I looked at each scholarship recipient. These young people who were just beginning to understand that they could honor their families and achieve their dreams. That success didn't require abandoning the people who'd made it possible. The Li Wei Chen Scholarship Program will support you through college and beyond. But more than that, it will remind you that your background is not a burden to overcome. It's a strength to build on. The ceremony ended with families taking photographs, students hugging their parents, and the kind of joy that comes from dreams finally feeling possible. I watched from the side of the cathedral as these families celebrated, thinking about how different this was from Thomas's funeral 6 months ago. Then, it had been a room full of people who'd known Thomas as a successful businessman but had never known the child I'd raised. Today, it was a room full of people who understood exactly where success really came from. Victoria approached as the crowd began to thin. "That was beautiful," she said. "Thomas would have been proud." Would he? I think so. I think he would have been proud to see his mother finally getting the recognition she deserved. I looked around the cathedral, thinking about the journey that had brought me here. 6 months ago, I'd been an invisible woman, ignored at her son's funeral. Today, I was the founder of a scholarship program that would help hundreds of young people avoid the choice Thomas thought he had to make. Victoria, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you think Thomas would have been happier if he'd told the truth from the beginning? If he'd acknowledged me instead of hiding me? Victoria considered the question carefully. I think he would have been happier, yes. But I also think he was too afraid to risk it. He'd spent so much of his childhood feeling ashamed that he couldn't imagine a world where his background would be seen as a strength instead of a weakness. And now these kids will grow up knowing that their backgrounds are strengths, that their families' sacrifices are something to honor, not hide. That success means bringing everyone along with you, not leaving them behind. As the last families left the cathedral, I stood alone in the space where Thomas had been mourned by people who'd never really known him. But today, his real story had finally been told. Today, his legacy was finally aligned with his mother's values. I walked to the back row where I'd sat 6 months ago, invisible and ignored. Now I understood why Thomas had left me everything that mattered to him. Not because he felt guilty, but because he finally understood that I was the only person who could ensure his legacy honored the truth instead of perpetuating the lie. Outside, the spring air was warm with promise. I had work to do, scholarships to award, young people to support. I had a foundation to run and a son's true story to tell. But most importantly, I had finally found my place in the world, not as the woman who'd been ignored, but as the woman who'd made everything possible. Sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't money or recognition, but the chance to ensure that the next generation never has to choose between love and success.